Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, a free site, bettingangle.us, a free site. Today is October 12th, 2025. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, folks, we're in the Alexander Usyk era in the heavyweight division. Right, many divisions don't have that one man you have to beat. Right, 154, for example. I know Jaron Ennis is there, but there's some other guys. An argument can be made that it's Sebastian Fundora's division right now. Right, at 147, who's the man? Right, is it Norman? Is it Barrios? At heavyweight, there are no questions. Right, who's the man? You know who the man is. It's Alexander Usyk. Now, to beat Usyk is going to take an edgy type of opponent, right? Someone who's not afraid to look sloppy, because Usyk, of course, is refined, right? He's jumping around, a lot of movement, hard to find in the ring. Still has quick hands. Let's just say when he lands big shots, they're sudden and they're quick, as we saw in his last fight against Daniel Dubois. So they're trade-offs. An opponent is going to have to make decisions on what they're going to give up in order to get something against Usyk. Right? Usyk has won some fights by decision. You got the feeling, at least I did, that Tyson Fury, in my opinion, whose era it was, before this era started with a split decision, you just got the feeling that Tyson Fury didn't have the coordination to just try to roughhouse the much smaller Usyk. Right? Tyson Fury, at the end of the day, wasn't the athlete Usyk is. There's a coordination gap. In other words, I need a bully, but I need a bully who can actually keep up with Usyk, where there's no safe harbor. You look at Daniel Dubois' feet, you see how methodical he is, and you realize he just doesn't have the fluidity to keep up with Usyk. Right? Usyk can back away from him and get away from him. Right? You need the heavyweight's equivalent of a Jaron Ennis, right, who just fought, guy with legs who can move, or a guy who's throwing wide shots, who's being aggressive, who can actually, as Usyk swings away in a certain direction, can aggressively follow him and throw a shot at such a wide angle that there is a danger zone that has a wide radius around that opponent. Now, the time to win bets is before the fights are even announced or put together. Right? I privately think, I say private, as privately as a guy who talks boxing on a public forum like YouTube can think as private, I privately think that there's certain fighters out there who would give Usyk all he could handle. But I believe the politics of the heavyweight division and the mistakes some of these fighters made have taken them out of the running. Right? So, I call Filip Hrgovic the heir apparent. I still believe that. Understand his one loss was to Daniel Dubois, and he wasn't carried out of the ring. He's standing upright in front of Dubois, and quite frankly, he was, in my opinion, landing an inordinate number of power shots. It's only Dubois' chin, the same chin that betrayed him against Usyk in the last fight. Right? It's only Dubois' chin that kept Ergovic from winning that fight. I think a guy who sparred with Usyk, who can throw wide radius shots, right, who can be aggressive on a front foot and make it look like the other guy is running. I think Martin Bakole, yes, the same guy who got stopped by Joe Parker. I think Martin Bakole has a shot on Alexander Usyk. Right? That's the kind of slugger who's going to come forward, who's going to be throwing shots. I'll agree. There's going to be a fitness gap in that fight. Right? Bakole's not anything close to being in the shape of Usyk. Usyk's strategy in that fight might be to take the fight into the later rounds. But make no mistake, there's not going to be a hesitancy on the part of Martin Bakole. He's not cautious. Right? He's a guy who's actually going to realize, hey, I'm in the ring with the guy who owns this era in the heavyweight division. This is my one chance. I'm not going to be nervous. I'm not going to wait to, get the crowd involved, wait 4, 5, 6, 7 rounds. No, I need to hurt this man, and I need to put in the work early, slow him down, so I can take him out. I don't even want to leave this in the hands of the judges. I don't want to be on the wrong end of a split decision, because I know this man won't give me a rematch, because he's seen me in sparring. Another guy who I think, and the world's just moved on from him, another guy who I think would give Southpaw Usyk all he could handle is Southpaw Zhilei Zhang. Right, folks? Zhang, his straight left is one of the best punches in boxing. He can throw it with accuracy. He can throw it easily. He doesn't need a wind-up. And this is not a guy who's bashful. But here again, right, there are questions about his stamina. I thought Caballero showed that there was a path to victory by going to Zhang's body. But let me just say, Caballero is singular. Right? Caballero's a guy who stopped Frank Sanchez off body shots. We just saw Makhmudov look good against Dave Allen. Understand that Caballero stopped Makhmudov off body shots. Big, strong, aggressive guy who's coming in the pocket on you. It's like a quarterback facing a good pass rush. Right? Some guys see a Makhmudov barreling in on them. They're like, oh, no, what am I going to do? Let me stay away from him. Body punchers think differently. They look at the guy and they think, wow, this guy's body is completely unprotected. Let me take advantage. Then let me move out of the pocket at angles this guy can't keep up with. Right? If Zhilei Zhang is not fighting Makhmudov, if he's not fighting Caballero, who might have a structural advantage on him, I would say that of all the guys Zhilei Zhang has fought, it's Caballero who's his boogeyman. Right? But Zhilei Zhang against an Usyk, you tell me, who's the opponent who badly hurt Zhilei Zhang? other than Caballero in the first half of a fight, right? And by the way, Caballero had to get off the canvas in that fight, just like Joe Parker had to get off the canvas, right? Zhang, let's just be upfront here, went 12 rounds with Joe Parker. Folks, that's a major accomplishment. Right, folks? I don't think Usyk has the punch. I just don't. To ring Zhang's bell in the first 6 rounds. Now, I'll agree, Usyk has great stamina. I'll agree the Jerry Forrest fight is a must look at. The last couple of rounds that Zhang had against Jerry Forrest, Zhang looks like he's out on his feet. If there's ever a fighter who's happy to hear the final bell, it's Zhang in that fight. I imagine Usyk might try to hide a bit in the first half of a fight, and then might try to, use his stamina to his advantage against Zhang in the later rounds. But understand, Zhang went the full 12 against Filip Ergovic. Right? And I would argue Zhang would have the edge on power shots in the early rounds. Well, what I want people to do, this fight may have been the most important fight on the Jaron Ennis card. I want people to look at 6'6", Guido Vianello, a guy who, by the way, another guy who stopped Makhmudov. Right? Recognize the talent level. Let me say, too, that, you look at a guy's record and the guy has some losses, and you think to yourself, oh, gee, how could this guy be the guy who could bother an unbeaten fighter, a guy who's been undisputed in multiple weight classes, a guy who won the Olympic gold medal like Usyk. And I'm just telling you, the latest clips of his fight against Alexis Barriere show that Vianello would be very dangerous. First, Vianello officially has been stopped in a fight. Folks, that's a injury stoppage. Right? He had a cut eyelid. Right? That's not your traditional stoppage. That's like making a lot out of the fact that Lennox Lewis stopped Vitaly Klitschko. Right? There again, that was an injury above the eye. Right? That's the kind of stoppage that Vianello suffered against Johnny Rice. I would argue, too, that you need to think about variance when you think about fighters. When Johnny Rice is bringing his A game, and I know this is not the way people think of it, right? We think of hardcore brands, right? Johnny Rice is one of the most dangerous men in the heavyweight division when he brings his A game. Right? Let me say, too, the Efe Ajagba fight, and this should tell you that Vianello has fought some real opponents. Vianello loses that fight by split decision. Split decision. The Richard Torres fight, understand, Torres, silver medal in the Olympics. Right? Torres, if you exclude Zhilei Zhang, Torres is arguably America's best heavyweight right now. Right? Unbeaten. Front foot guy, more front foot than Usyk. Southpaw. Can fight low. But even in that fight, Vianello makes the adjustments in the middle of the fight and starts to have the upper hand. Now, Torres, to his credit, reestablishes his advantage in the later rounds. I would say Torres is an underrated fighter. I think Torres today is a threat to the throne. The fact that Torres, who has a lot of knockouts, did not stop Vianello. The fact that Efe Ajagba, who has one of the biggest punches in the heavyweight division, did not stop Vianello. Should tell you a lot about him. So he was fighting Alexis Barriere, who was unbeaten. Southpaw. Right now, I need for folks to understand that this is Vianello fighting in a style that's not who he normally is. This is the 6'6" guy with a back foot who's an athlete. This is the 6'6" guy who has rhythm. Right? So he can beat you behind a jab, leveraging his 6'6". Right? Moving around the ring. Now this is him making a trade-off. I'll concede, when you look at the film, and I have the film in my favorites folder, and this is a must-watch, because we're trying to figure out the fighter before he emerges on the main stage, before the public figures out that this guy's a bad man. Now, in this fight, believe it or not, Vianello against an unbeaten guy with a lot of knockouts. I believe Barriere's record was 12-0 with 10 KOs. Right? There was buzz about him. He's not a young guy, right? Vianello's 31. I believe Barriere is around 30 years old. Neither of these guys was 22, 23, 24. Right? This wasn't a Jared Anderson situation where Anderson is just too young and he's thrown in the ring with Martin Bakole. Right? These are guys who fought a lot, have been in the ring. Barriere had an amateur pedigree. Barriere is 6'4". It's not like Barriere was in looking up at, some Sebastian Fundora guy who's several inches taller than him. Well, here you have Vianello deciding to fight exactly the kind of fight that I think could beat Usyk. Right now, I'll concede. He gets hit with too many punches in this fight. I'll concede it's troubling that he's fighting a southpaw and he gets hit with as many straight lefts as he does in this fight. But what I want you to look at is the fact that because Vianello is 6'6", there's a natural cushion between him and an opponent. I want you to also look at the radius of his punches. Right? One of the things that frustrates me with Anthony Joshua is the fact that Joshua has a great left hook. Right? Look at when he has Vladimir Klitschko hurt in one of the most important fights of Joshua's career, right? That's really Joshua's coming out fight up to that moment. And Vladimir Klitschko gets off the canvas, and look at the punch that Joshua is trying to end the fight with. He has a semi-conscious Vladimir Klitschko in front of him, and Joshua's loading up on left hooks. Why can't he throw that against fully conscious fighters in the normal flow? Well, folks, here you have, in the normal flow, Guido Vianello, who has an excellent right hand. The right hand does more damage than his left. But against a southpaw, this guy is throwing left hooks. Right? Let's figure out the logistics. The southpaw in front of Vianello, who's righty, would have his dominant hand over on Vianello's right side. Right? So the left hook is a way to, number one, prevent a lefty, right, from moving to his right. Limit the lefty, especially if you have the right hand that Vianello has. right? You want the lefty lining up with your dominant hand. But more importantly, the left hook allows you to throw power shots away from the opponent's dominant hand. In other words, I get to load up, and if I hit the opponent with my left hook, right, I can hurt the guy with power shots. I'm not trying to win on the scorecards, right, against the guy who owns the era. That's hard to do, right, because Usyk has possession, right? I understand no one buys my possession concept. That's okay. I'm just talking about how I look at the sport. But importantly, if I throw the left hook and I miss, which Vianello does several times in this fight, if I throw the left hook and I miss, I'm not getting countered on that side with the guy's dominant hand. So I want people to look at this fight. Vianello is coming in. He's getting hit with shots, but he's doling out punishment, and he's throwing wide hooks with both hands. Right? He's a bit like Jaron Ennis. He's throwing wide hooks with both hands. He has power. He has length, being 6'6", and he's an athlete. You wouldn't guess he's 6'6", looking at his movement in the ring. In other words, the guy moves like he's 6'2", 6'3", but he's 6'6", right? So add this guy to my list on fighters who would give Usyk a hard time. Now, Usyk is lucky, right? Joe Parker is fighting Fabio Wardley. That's going to solve one of his problems, right? Because someone's going to win that fight. So then Usyk can say, oh, okay, Wardley lost. I'm not going to fight unbeaten Wardley, right? And Wardley is a wild card. This is a guy who came up through white-collar boxing, right? Wardley's not overthinking it like many of these heavyweights, thinking, oh, gee, should I throw my left hook? No. Wardley's an action fighter, right? Joe Parker. I think Parker gives Usyk a hard time. That's why Usyk, of course, requested more time because of injury and then was seen in a nightclub. I don't think Usyk wants to fight Joe Parker. Right? Let's be real. Parker's beaten Deontay Wilder. Parker's beaten Zhilei Zhang. Right? Parker's beaten Martin Bakole. And so, let me just say, fortunately, the public seems to be in love with Moses Utama. Maybe it's a generational thing. Maybe the public has just grown tired of seeing heavyweights in their 30s all the time. Right? So Usyk can satisfy the public by fighting Moses Utama, by, possibly fighting someone else. I see Daniel Dubois is determined to get a third crack at Usyk. Right? So Dubois has signed to fight an eliminator. What I don't think you're going to hear is Usyk agreeing to fight Filip Ergovic, Martin Bakole, Zhilei Zhang, or this guy who you need to keep an eye on, Guido Vianello. Let me say this too. Vianello, 31. Heavyweights age more slowly. Right? They do. Usyk himself is 37, 38 years old? Right? I'm telling you, some of the guys in their 40s, Luis Ortiz, and I say his name so many times, people always say, oh, Dwyer, why do you like Luis Ortiz? Because he's a slick southpaw. Because he's not going to hesitate to cut off the ring, because he gave Andy Ruiz all he could handle. Now let me say, at this age, just like Vianello gets hit with too many straight lefts by Barriere, right? I'll concede Luis Ortiz's punch resistance is a cause of concern. He looked to me to be beating Deontay Wilder twice, only to get knocked out both times, right? I'll concede Andy Ruiz dropped him, right? Revisit that fight. That's one of the best fights in the heavyweight division in recent years, right? He's in his 40s and he's competitive, right? Folks, let's see what Usyk does. I'm kind of fascinated by the fact that Crawford is thinking about more fights and that Usyk's thinking about more fights, right? Usyk really fascinates me because Usyk happened to fight the right fighters, right? AJ's cautious. In my opinion, practically ceded the first few rounds to Usyk, right? Usyk, of course, southpaw, complicated, southpaw with movement, right? Tyson Fury, I don't think Usyk beats Prime Fury, but I believe Tyson Fury was past his prime when he fought Usyk. Now, I'm not talking about accomplishments in the ring. Obviously, Tyson Fury was unbeaten when he faced Usyk the first time, right? But let's just say Fury didn't have the reflexes that he had against Vladimir Klitschko, right? That Fury had left the building. Fury had been knocked down by Francis Ngannou, right? Fury, had some tough fights. That Otto Wallin fight was rough and tumble at times, right? The heavyweight division is deeper than at any time I've seen it, right? And you've had some glorious heavyweight eras, right? The 70s, forget the front line guys. I'm not even going to mention them. You had guys like Joe Bugner. You had guys like Jerry Quarry, right? Ernie Shavers knocks down Larry Holmes. When Larry gets off the canvas, I'm not even sure if Larry knew where he was. Look at Larry's facial expression, right? The only reason that fight continues is this is the 70s, right? You'd practically have to get hit with an 18-wheeler in the ring for a ref to wave it off, right? You had a whole group of fighters in the 70s outside of, Ali, Foreman, Joe Frazier, I'll even put Kenny Norton in that range. Well, now, I'm just telling you, and keep in mind, I was here online talking about Usyk, his potential as a heavyweight, well before the public knew who he was, right? Let me just say, you have a bunch of guys who, to me, would give Usyk more of a fight than Moses Atama would, right? Let me also congratulate Atama. He's an old school guy. I read a recent interview of him, and he's seeing things clearly. He views a fight against Usyk as a no-lose fight, right? His logic is, if it's too soon, too early for him, okay, great. He can live with a loss to a future Hall of Famer, right? But Atama also adds that if he lands on Usyk, then he's the heavyweight champion of the world, right? As I've said here in a prior video, and I know I'm getting off the beaten path, as I said in a prior video, if I were advising Atama, I would tell Atama to take the fight. Because of the big money involved, folks, if you're fighting for the heavyweight championship, you're getting paid, particularly in this Riyadh season era, right? You need to take the money before you have the Jared Anderson, Martin Bacoli fight, before the public starts to see your kryptonite. Take the fight, right? Just like Canelo's loss to Floyd Mayweather, we didn't think that much of it because the idea was that Canelo was an up-and-coming fighter, right? Floyd was the standard at that time, right? Canelo got valuable experience. In fact, I think he watched Floyd and copied Floyd's use of his left hook, right? Canelo got valuable experience, was able to go the distance with Floyd. I believe a judge actually had that fight a draw or gave it to Canelo or something like that. So Canelo, who didn't deserve that scoring, got a feather in his cap because of that fight, right? But at the same time, we understood he was, too young, right? I remember Julian Jackson fighting Mike McCallum. Now, at the time, we did think Jackson was a paradigm shift, just like people think Moses Atama is now, right? But you understood he was fighting a master, right? He was fighting the body snatcher Jamaican in Jamaica, right? So you kind of understood that he was up against it, right? Moses Atama, if they offer you the Usyk fight, if Usyk says, look, I don't need to satisfy sanctioning bodies at this stage of my career, I'll fight you for big money, take the fight, right? But I'm going to be blunt. I don't think he would have as good a chance of beating Usyk as would Ergovic, Bacoli, Zhang, or Guido Vianello. Those are my thoughts. Premium subscribers won on this. I talked up Vianello in that private video. Folks, take a look at this fighter. He's real. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section of this YouTube video. Understand that Barriere is a southpaw. So as you look at Vianello's strategy against him, understand this fight's in essence a tune-up for a fight against an Usyk if it lands in his lap. Let me also say this too. Just like Bacoli got a fight against Joe Parker at the last minute. Just like Vitaly Klitschko, and I understand Vitaly Klitschko was training for his own fight, but just like Vitaly Klitschko got a shot on Lennox Lewis because Kirk Johnson couldn't go forward with his fight against Lennox Lewis. And of course, in my opinion, from this seat, Vitaly Klitschko gave Lewis the best fight any opponent gave Lewis who didn't beat him. Right? Oliver McCall, kudos to him. Hasim Rockman did land a shot. Okay, fine. But just straight up, in terms of as you're watching the fight, you thought Lewis is getting outboxed. Just understand that guy got a call late, not as late as Bacoli, but very late, wasn't the original opponent, and almost made history in that moment. Right? Here you have Vianello accepting this fight against unbeaten Barriere. You see the coordination gap here. You see the fluidity gap here. And this is Vianello fighting off-brand on his front foot, throwing wide hooks. Vianello got the stoppage. Folks, he's had the dry run for Usyk already. Let's say Atama signs to fight Usyk. Then Atama is hurt in sparring and can't make the fight. If they call this guy, I'm just telling you, against Usyk, he's going to be the betting side of the play. They're going to give you better than 2-to-1 odds. And you're going to know if this guy went the distance against Richard Torres, if this guy went the distance against Efe Ajagba, if this guy's coming off a fight against a hard-hitting southpaw, he's ready. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section. Thanks for stopping by.